The men and women from every walk of life who each year pass through doors like this.
You think of mental health services predominantly as hospitalization, people being sent to the state hospital.
You all crazy?
For the average person, you have an image of something because, you see it on TV, you watch it, there's images. We have an image of mental health, and a lot of the image is an old image. The state hospital model is an image. When you think of, if I say mentally ill, and you think of some late night TV show, ooh, well, that's, to some degree, a nice image from 1900, but it's not quite like that. You built your state hospitals in such a way that they became a sort of a second residential place for a family member who was psychotic.
Awfully tired. Sit down.
Schizophrenia, like you said, bipolar, manic depression, bipolar disorders. People who were, like I said before, you're delusional. They had false beliefs. I believe people are out to get me. I believe, Or they hallucinated. They heard or saw or tasted something that wasn't there. I think you had tremendous emphasis on that as opposed to I feel depressed. Sometimes I just don't have the energy. That it was not what was emphasized nearly as much.
We're discussing Mr. Harding's problem concerning his wife.
So we started from those movies you see on late night TV, where people go off to the state hospitals and all the horror stories that you see in those movies. Having come from the East where your state hospitals looked like Castle Draculas or something out of bad movies, it wasn't that unusual. It was these big old brick buildings on a big huge piece of land where, with its own cows and its own farmland. That was just sort of an American standard. So it really wasn't a whole lot different to go visit Griffin or to visit places in other states. It was very, very similar, model nationally.
Meanwhile, they're living here. 3,200 men and women all gathered together in a modern mental institution, a city in itself, complete with every facility for effective treatment.
If you've ever driven by like Griffin down in Norman, you notice there's a big farm around it. That was very, very, very typical going back into the late 1800s, early 1900s. In the late 60s, just a little bit before I came to Oklahoma, Kennedy put through a bill at the national level, and his theme was community mental health centers. And a comprehensive community mental health center was a mental health center for everybody, not just psychotic people, not just the people who heard voices that weren't there, who hallucinated, who had false beliefs, who had delusions, but for everybody. It was a range of services. Set up some federal funding. Oklahoma got some of it for some of its, a handful of its state mental health centers. And at that point, your mental health centers started adding, besides the hospitalization model, adding an outpatient component where you could talk to somebody, adding a component for children, adding a component for elderly. It broadened far beyond just the narrow focus of, so-and-so is becoming very strange, we're going to have to send them to the state hospital. I think that changed dramatically everything in how we handled mental health. That was very, very strong until the 1980s. And then when Ronald Reagan became president, he, for some reason, decided we should turn the money back to the states. And so he put through legislation to transfer all the federal monies back to the states. The feds at this point had been giving you what they called seed money. Seed money was money where we reduce it a little bit each year and help you develop your own state comprehensive model. When Reagan transferred it back to the states, each state took a different approach. A large number of states, Oklahoma being one of them, chose to a large extent go back to the old model. As you would expect, Oklahoma has been one of the lowest per capita funding of mental health for the last 30 years in the country. And Oklahoma was one of the last states to decide that was medical necessity.
Would you please take these gentlemen?
Fortunately, over the last 20 years or so, we have made tremendous improvements in medication. We've been able to cut hospitalizations down dramatically because of the increases in that, and an emphasis on, once we get them out of the hospital, of case management and other things to support the people who are out of the hospitals. It's shrinking. We've it's like everything else. Society has moved on. We've moved away from the state hospital model. There are still some people that need longer-term treatment, and it has value. But we have less of those people because of the medications and the other technologies to get them into the community and to monitor them. It's much, much more cost efficient than the old days when you got stuck in the state hospital forever.
Fred, I'm going to send you to the hospital.
We don't have much in the West state hospitals. We went through a process of phasing out state hospitals, several years ago. So we don't really have an Eastern State Hospital. One time we had Eastern, Western, and Central. Eastern and Western as such don't exist anymore. If you want to go back to what we think of as earlier mental health, they sound a lot worse than they are. But I don't think people react nearly as much anymore if you say I'm in mental health as they would have, say, 30, 40 years ago. It's a different image. It's been toned down dramatically.
It's obvious what your problem is, Bob. You're just a little afraid of getting old.
Strangely enough, once the American Psychological Association did a study on what things helped improve the image of mental health, and of all the things in the world, the Bob Newhart show. You remember he was the You're Nice Friendly Chicago Shrink, you know. Bob Hartley, because he was this human guy who's kind of messed things up, and he was kind of, you know, he improved the image because he was this normal sort of person. But I think to some degree that's representative of what did happen. The image of mental health, if you go back to 1960 and Psycho, and Tony Perkins and Norman Bates is going to get you. That's kind of an image to some degree that's always kind of hung on. You read in the paper about the serial killer and you go, a psychotic. And you see those movies. In reality, the largest percentage of those kind of stories, those people are not psychotic.
What do you think you are, for Christ's sake? Crazy or something? Mm-hmm. Well, you're not. You're not. You're no crazier than the average asshole out walking around on the streets.